Okay, so we're on lesson number 59, the review lessons of workbook of A Course in Miracles. The set of reviews for the first 50 lessons, God goes with me wherever I go. God is my strength, vision is his gift. God is my source. I cannot see apart from him. God is the light in which I see, and God is the mind with which I think. And as I was reading these a couple of times this morning, there is saying in 12-step program, and they call it people who are white-knuckling their sobriety. And it's interesting because when I read these, it's like, how can I be alone when God always goes with me? How can I be doubtful and unsure of myself when perfect certainty abides in him? How can I be disturbed by anything when he rests in me in absolute peace? How can I suffer when love and joy surround me through him? Let me not cherish illusions about myself. I am perfect because God goes with me wherever I go. And there's a difference between self-realization and self-actualization. And there's a difference between white-knuckling sobriety and becoming comfortable with yourself after and when you've finished utilizing the substances that you've been abusing. And I think, what I see a lot of times is people attempting to white-knuckle a self that exists in perfect certainty and wherein which suffering and love and joy abound, without actually doing the work to actualize that self, having had moments of realization. So, you can meditate and have a moment of realization of that self, but unless that self becomes actualized and made manifest, then you're not in a sense fulfilling the rest as a lesson, which says, let me not cherish illusions about myself. I am perfect because God goes with me wherever I go. So many times you'll see people attempting to act with certainty and act as though they're not suffering, or deny the suffering that they experience and utilize these as an affirmation of the unreality of suffering without the recognition that the true unreality would bring that the suffering doesn't occur. And I think it's a necessity to be honest with yourself in order to admit the fact that you are suffering and have something to compare it to, a self that doesn't suffer. And perhaps you do, in moments of doing these lessons or meditation, stumble upon that self. But until you're actually able to make manifest that self through actualization, which requires forgiveness of all the illusions, not just the conceptual idea that they are illusions. And that's what the Course aims to bring about in us. Jesus urges Helen in her notes to read the Bible and look at the way he lived his life. We were talking there was a conversation that was being had about, the idea of exchange of money as within spiritual circles for teachings. And, the teaching is all well and good, but if you look back on the life of Jesus, many, thousands and thousands, on several occasions, gather around him. And he teaches them just simply because they show up to hear him, they show up to be healed, and then he himself feeds them. There's no asking for a donation. There's no running off to the city to buy food. There's no taking up collections. There's no sharing of, what the people bring. He takes a few loaves and fishes that were given to him by a boy that had come and multiplies them, and at the end there's 12 baskets of remnants. Now, if you want to be like Jesus and live like Jesus, then we have to share the one mind of Christ. And that's about not merely realization of the fact that it's there and using it as a concept over another concept. It's not about like denying the suffering. It's about being honest about the suffering and pain you're in. It's about being honest about the illusions you're still holding about yourself, and the willingness to begin to let the light of the true self shine through those illusions through the action of forgiveness. That's what it's for. God is my strength. Vision is his gift. Let me not look to my own eyes to see today. So we could be seeing through our own eyes, experiencing pain and suffering, and then try to deny it because we have this concept that says, well, it doesn't matter. God goes with me wherever I go. So it doesn't matter because I'm whole and perfect, even though I'm not in the realization of wholeness and perfection, and I'm suffering and hurting. And I just don't want to admit it because I want to be spiritually correct about what it is I'm doing and develop a nice spiritualized ego that utilizes the intellectualization of your own mind rather than the ability for your mind to not only realize the truth but begin to actualize it by putting the realization into practice here in the world of space and time. At some point, in order for heaven and earth to not exist as separate states, heaven must be made manifest by you, so that you can see it and operate under the laws of the kingdom rather than continue to operate by the laws of man and swear there's a kingdom that you're going to get to at some point in time. Nobody has ever awoken in the past. Nobody will ever awaken in the future. No one has ever really been born here, and no one will ever really die here. Yet that's meaningless if the here that you're experiencing is not being seen through the eyes of vision based on the realization of the truth of who you are and the actualization of it through the utilization of something like these lessons. It's why we go from early in the lessons to doing it once or twice during the day, to not only doing the lesson 3 or 4 times a day in extended practice periods, but utilizing the lesson constantly throughout the day when you're looking upon things that contradict the reality that you're being explained and taught about in the lessons and in the text. So God is my source. I cannot see apart from him. The truth of the matter is, the idea that you're asleep and dreaming and this is an illusion has to mean that you have a reality someplace, but because if you did not exist, this could not be occurring. So somewhere you are created and somewhere you remain created, and the ability to allow yourself, your heart and your mind to be unified in expressing the purpose of the soul, which is the creation, which is what you are, is the ability to take the realizations that we get in moments of meditation and actualize them through the practice of the information, let's call it, that we get in those moments of realization, so that the practice becomes not merely doing these lessons at the times appointed, but the true practice comes, as Jesus says, at the end of the workbook, when you're released from these formal lessons and the Holy Spirit begins to bring you lessons that you can utilize in the course of your day, begins to give you very personal instructions as to how you undo the illusions, the spell of the illusions that you are still under, by utilizing the information that comes from the projected imagery as you reflect upon it, in order to heal your mind of the necessity for the imagery to ever be needed once again, so you can return to your natural state. Because quite frankly, you're not going to return to your natural state by dying, and you're not going to return to your natural state by clinging to concepts. All concepts, even the concepts that are being utilized to teach A Course in Miracles, all concepts bind. Salvation can be seen as the release from concepts. So while concepts that are in line with the lessons that we're being taught become useful, conceptualization of your experience itself is the great bar to the actualization and the ability to make manifest the kingdom as Jesus did through the utilization of the power of his mind when he began to actualize the infinite nature of who he discovered himself to be, when he actualized the teaching that there is no death through his own resurrection. Now, at the level where we're souls, we're quite capable of sharing in the certainty of the resurrection, not as a concept, but as a realized, actualized experience when we look at all the strange notions and illusions we hold about ourselves being bodies and needing to die. In the Course, when he talks about, in the Manual for Teachers, when he talks about reincarnation, he said reincarnation is impossible because carnation itself is not true. Now, that doesn't mean that there isn't some use to many of you, because he says, life here are cyclical journeys. It's a cyclical journey of death to life and life to death and back and forth again, until we do not only realize the truth, but actualize the truth in our experience of ourself and our being through the application of the principles that we have received through the guidance that we get when we're faced with situations here in space and time that seem to cause us to suffer, think we're going to lose, and rather than white-knuckling the realizations or A Course in Miracles, surrender finally and actualize that truth in our interactions with our brothers and sisters here in space and time, in the world itself. I mean, you can't go on and proclaim that you're safe and at home in God and continue to lock yourself up and chain yourself in homes, fearful of the fact that somebody's going to enter in and steal your life or steal your goods. Your mind demands integrity. And the lack of it is, in a sense, you can look at it like this. It says the Holy Spirit induces discomfort in order to show unique correction. It's the rising up, and he talks about it this way. Love, as love rises up, it brings the fear, raises the fear. It raises the discomfort to a level of going from in your unconscious to becoming conscious. And as we read in yesterday's lesson, the purpose of the world becomes a place where we can free ourselves through utilization of what's rising up. The illusions that are rising up through the action of forgiveness, the action of mind we call forgiveness, can be seen for what they are when we look at them with the Holy Spirit, not when we conceptualize the experience that we're having and claim wholeness and perfection in spite of the fact that we're not experiencing wholeness and perfection. We want to kill the people we're around because they're disturbing us. So God is the light in which I see. I cannot see in darkness. God is the only light. Therefore, if I am to see, it must be through him. I have tried to define what seeing is, and I have been wrong. Now it is given me to understand that God is the light in which I see. Let me welcome vision and the happy world it will show me. Well, you can't conceptualize a happy world, again, as I said, by turning the shit into the conceptual shit of your mind into conceptual shinola and making it shine. Just because you can spin concepts in your mind, that's not what this is about. It's not what it's for. It's about looking directly at what's occurring, seeing it for what it is, and then allowing a reinterpretation to come not from the ego's ability to conceptualize nice, happy reasons for things to go on, but for the Holy Spirit to heal your mind and show you where the happiness comes from. Happiness will never come from turning the world into a conceptual, spiritualized illusion. It comes from healing your mind of the need for illusion, and yet being willing to participate in as you know yourself in order to take your place in the plan for salvation and fulfilling your part in the plan. All joy is in the doing of God's will, not in reconceptualizing your experience here in space-time to make it sound like you're doing God's will. God is the mind with which I think. I have no thoughts I do not share with God. I have no thoughts apart from him because I have no mind apart from his. So that means right here, right now, as you're sitting, whatever condition you find yourself in, even if you're in a condition of sickness, pain, suffering, and death, the indication that you could be here now reading this lesson means you already are sharing your mind, God's mind. You cannot not, because without sharing that, without being a thought in God's mind, you would have no ability to even seem to exist in space and time. To even be able to read that your reality and home is not here. As part of his mind, my thoughts and his thoughts are mine. His thoughts are my thoughts. His thoughts are eternal. His thoughts are infinite. And you can begin to see, or just letting me call upon this gift today so that this day may help me to understand eternity. And eternity isn't a long time. Eternity is the surrendering of the need for time because you've learned who you are in reality, and that reality is infinite and eternal and is one of totality of love. It's not about taking unloving thoughts and spinning them so they sound loving. You can do that, and you can con yourself and other people into thinking that there's something occurring when you do. But that's just the capriciousness of the ego, the insidious, cunning nature of the ego, being able to baffle you into thinking that you've achieved something, when in fact you've relied once again on the ego to reconceptualize your experience in order to not undo the thinking that there is an ego in its entirety through the actualization of the moments of realization. So that may give you something to think about today, but God does go, whether or not you're in the achievement of salvation, this is true. God goes with you wherever you go. Whether or not you've come to the conclusion of your necessity for space and time through the realization and actualization of the eternal nature of yourself by having all and giving all. Whether or not that's happened, these are all true. And they will be true and done unto you as you do them unto yourself and unto the world around you. These must be made manifest, otherwise they're completely useless. They'll be nice, in times of trouble, to come up with another concept to allow you to think you don't believe it, but all you're doing is repressing your own emotions, your own passion, and your passion is what your life is. You don't have to repress your passion. You just have to utilize it for the purpose it was given you. And that's why I wanted to say yesterday, but I didn't. It's like, in the nature of creation, here in space and time, Jesus takes all the abilities that we're individually have and individually given and shows us how individually to begin to use those and make manifest those abilities to continue to glorify God, not to glorify the ego in the world of space and time. We've all been given gifts. We all have abilities. We can start right where we are with the gifts that we are and the abilities we've been given and utilize them for the purpose of our soul. So while we're all the same as souls in the kingdom here in space and time, it is the flaw in the diamond that makes the diamond individual. And that individuality can shine through that diamond. So no two flaws are alike, but they all establish the diamond as what it is as an individual in the kingdom of diamonds. So we're imperfect perfectionists, so to speak, but the imperfections of our mind can be utilized to shine forth the goodness of God, and we could all do it in our own way. So while we all do it through the underlying same principle because we're underlying all part of the same mind, we utilize what we've been given individually to allow that to be made manifest through us. And as we do it with any one thing, we begin to understand the nature of the ability to generalize it to everything, which is, in effect, what Jesus did. So if you want to be like Jesus, we must share the same mind that Jesus did and make that mind manifest here and now, not to convince us. What Jesus says, miracles as spectacles to induce belief aren't true. They're utilized by the faithful for the faithful. They're utilized by believers to be able to allow them to continue in their own belief, understanding, and actualization of the self that they've come to know they are, demonstrating to themselves and to the universe the willingness to let go of the self that is not that. And that's why we need forgiveness, and that's why miracles will demonstrate the power of our mind. They won't awaken us. They show us that we but dream a dream that is not true. It's only the willingness to let that dream go that proves to us once and for all that it's not true and we no longer need it. And for many of you who are in your final sojourn, that's where you're coming to understand. You don't have to do this again in any regard, just simply by following the directions that are given to you. So God goes with me and goes with you wherever you go today. Remember that.